and welcome to another easy math video. Today we're going to continue with our look at place value and comparing different numbers using place value, but today's video is specifically going to be dealing with decimal numbers. Now if you haven't already watched our previous video on comparing different numbers using place value, I highly suggest doing that. That video specifically focused on the use of whole numbers and larger whole numbers. Today, like I said, we're going to be looking at decimal numbers. So what are decimal numbers? Well, decimals, any decimal number that you have is basically you are dealing with amounts that are smaller than 1, but they're more than 0. So they're not nothing, they're more than nothing, but they're smaller than 1. And I'll give you a few examples, real world examples of when we use these types of numbers. So if you've ever watched the Olympics, and specifically sprinting, like 100 meters, for example, they're dealing with seconds, but the difference between the first, second, and third place runner is almost never, the difference is never more than a second. Okay, it's usually less than a second. So that's when we use decimals. Okay, so one runner may have ran 9.67, and then the other runner, the second place runner, may have ran 9.94. Okay, so they're both in the 9-second range, but we're dealing with increments smaller than a second, smaller than 1. So we have to use the decimal. Another example where we use decimal numbers is when we are dealing with money, and specifically money less than $1. Okay, we're all used to using dollar amounts, but if we have money values that are less than $1 and we call those cents, those are decimal numbers. So if something cost me $1.50, okay, it cost me $1.5. Okay, so these are just a couple of examples of how we use decimal numbers. And if that still doesn't make complete sense to you, here is a number line. And you'll see here that on one end of the number line, we have 0 or nothing. And then on the other end, we have 1. Okay, and then we have smaller amounts in between. Okay, we have 0.1 or 1/10 of $1. We have 0.2 or 2/10, 3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, and 9/10. So as I specified in the previous video on place value, even when we're dealing with decimals, we're using a base 10 system, which means that we start with the number 0 all the way up to the number 9. And if we have any more than that, then we have to move into the next place value to the left. And what does that look like? Well, let's look at this place value chart right here. Okay. So before, you'll see that there's a money value in the top left corner. Before we get into that, let's just go over some of the decimal place values. Okay. So I will start here with the largest place value that you see here on our chart, which is the thousands column. Then we have the hundreds, we have the tens, we have the ones, which in our last video I did mention is the smallest whole place value you can have, whole number place value you can have. Now once you get smaller than 1, we have tenths, we have hundreds, we have thousands, and then we have smaller increments as well, but we're going to stop there, okay? Because we can keep going all day. Now, let's go ahead and place this amount here in the place value chart. And actually, you know what? Before I go ahead and do that, okay, let's say I had, let's just say I had 8 cents here, or 80 cents rather, okay? If I had 80 cents, okay, that would mean that I had 8 tenths of a dollar, and 0 hundredths. Okay, now let's say I gave you another 8 cents. Okay, then we'd be at 88 cents or 8 tenths and 8 hundredths of a dollar. And if I gave you another one, we'd be at 89 cents or 89 hundredths of a dollar. And if I gave you another 1 cent, that would mean that we have to reset and jump into the next place value. There would be no more hundredths, and then I would have to add 1/10 to the tenths column. So this would become a 9, and this would become a 0. Okay? And if I continued to give you, another cent and so on and so forth till we got to 99 cents, well, that would mean, let's say I give you 1 more cent, that would mean you'd be at a dollar. So we'd have to reset, okay? Because you'd end up with 10 hundredths, okay? Which means this becomes a 0. We have to add another 1 to this place value, which would take you to 10 tenths. And once again, like I mentioned in the last video, you can't have 2 digits in any place value. This would bring us to 0, which means we'd have to add a 1 here in the ones column. Now I have a dollar. Okay? So we always go from 0 to 9 in each of the place values. And if you get more than 9 in any of the place values, you have to add to the next place value to the left. Now let's go ahead and punch in the number that we have here in our top left corner. Okay? So let me just go ahead and punch this in. We have, let's start actually from the lowest place value. We have 7 hundredths of a dollar, 6 tenths of a dollar, so that means basically 67 cents. We have $5 here in the ones column. We have 2 tens or 20 here in the tens column. And then we have 5 hundredths, which is our largest place value here. I'm just going to move this over so it's a little closer and a little neater. Okay, so we have $525.67 or 67 hundredths. Now you'll see here on the very left, the very right rather, we have an even smaller place value, which is called the thousandths. Obviously, we don't deal with that with money. The smallest amount you can have in money is a cent, or which is placed in the hundredths column. Okay. With other things like time, like seconds, you can have thousandths of a second. Okay. We'll look a little bit more at this in just a second. Now let's use another example. Okay. The world record for the women's 100-meter race is 10 seconds and 10.49 seconds. Okay, so if we were to place this in a place value chart here, we'd have 1 for the tens column, we'd have 0 for the ones, okay, and then we would have 49 hundredths. When we say decimal numbers, just so you know, and let me just make this clear, the smallest amount that you have, okay, that is going to be what you call the decimal number. So if I just had, this was just 10.4, it would be 10 and 4 tenths, okay? But because I have 49, we call it 49 hundredths. If I were to add a 1 here to the thousandths column, then we would have 491 thousandths. Okay? Now, just so it makes sense, guys, I am going to be showing you that just because you have more digits in a decimal number does not mean that we are dealing with a larger amount. Okay? So if that doesn't make sense, the next example will explain how that works. So let's quickly go through once again our steps for comparing numbers by place value. They're the exact same as I showed in the other video, just today we're dealing with decimal numbers. So let's compare two amounts, okay? Here we have 10.62 kilometers versus 10.098 kilometers. Okay, step one, you should start by comparing the highest place value available. In this case, that would be the tens column. They both have a 1, so that doesn't help us. If they both have the same amount, step 2 says we move, step 2 tells us if one of these two amounts was greater, the one with the greater number in the largest place value column. So, for example, if this top number had a 2 instead of a 1, that would automatically make it the larger number. Step 3 tells us if they have the same number in that place value, we have to work our way to the right to the next place value, which in this case would be the 1's place value. Okay? And we see here in the 1's, they both have a 0. So that doesn't help us. Now we're going to have to repeat the steps again, which is what step 4 tells us here. So we move on to the tenths column. Okay, and we got to compare tenths. So here, the top number has 6 tenths and the bottom number has 0 tenths. So automatically, this top number is the larger number. Now, some of you may be saying, whoa, hold on a second. Okay, why is that the case? Why is 10.62 kilometers greater than 10.098 kilometers? Okay, and that is because, okay, it has the larger value in the larger place value. Okay, and if you don't understand that, if that is confusing to you, because this only is the case when we are dealing with decimal numbers. Some of you may be saying, well, wait, this one here has 5 digits in it, and this one to the left here that I have highlighted only has 4 digits. Well, if that is difficult for you to understand, all you have to do is add a 0 here in the thousandths column. Okay? So, just like before when we're dealing with whole numbers, once you don't have any more numbers to the left of the greatest place value, like here, we both have our greatest place value in these numbers, like I said, was the tens column. They both had 1s. Like I said in the last video, there is an infinite amount of zeros that we can put in front of these numbers. It doesn't change that. Even though there's 2 zeros in front of this number here, we're still dealing with 10 kilometers. Okay? The same thing goes with decimal numbers. Once we don't have any more numbers, decimal numbers, so this one here ends at 62 hundredths, we can put an infinite amount of zeros behind it. Okay? And you can also, not only can you call the decimal here for 10.62, we can call it 62 hundredths, but if you wanted to add that extra 0 like I showed you that you could also call it 620 thousandths. Those are equal values. Both are okay to say. Okay? And if that helps you understand this better and compare numbers better, then go ahead and when you don't have a value, just plug in a 0 in your place value chart. So what I'm telling you here is that 10 kilometers and 62 hundredths of a kilometer are greater than 10 kilometers and 98 thousandths of a kilometer. All right? So once again, don't get confused. Just because one number might have more digits, more decimal digits, don't assume that it is automatically the larger number. Okay? I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. If you like the video, please give us a like. Please give us a subscribe. And if you have any questions, like I said, feel free to leave them in the comments. Give it a shot, guys.